The invitation had arrived on heavy cardstock, embossed with gold lettering and sealed with wax. It was the kind of invitation that announced to the world that the person receiving it had arrived. Arthur Vance had received hundreds of such invitations over the years. He had accepted maybe a dozen, but this one was different. The gala was being held at the Ritz-Carlton in Miami, a hotel that Arthur had been quietly evaluating for acquisition. The current owners were in trouble, deep trouble. Debts were piling up, creditors were circling, and Arthur, through a maze of holding companies and offshore trusts, had been positioning himself to buy the entire property for the past 18 months. He had not told anyone, not his children, not his friends, not the partners at his firm. He had learned long ago that the best deals were made in silence, so when the invitation arrived, he decided to attend. Not as Arthur Vance, the billionaire, not as the man who could buy and sell everyone in that ballroom 100 times over, but as someone else. He put on his old jacket, the brown one worn at the elbows, the one he had owned for 10 years. He put on his old shoes, scuffed leather, resoled twice. He left his Patek Philippe in the drawer and wore a simple Casio. He did not shave. He did not comb his hair. He looked, by any objective measure, like a man who had wandered into the wrong party. He arrived at 7 o'clock. The ballroom was magnificent, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, tables draped in white linen and set with silver that gleamed under the soft light. The guests were dressed in silks and cashmeres and custom, tailored suits that cost more than most people's cars. Champagne flowed. Laughter echoed off the walls. Arthur walked in unnoticed. He took a glass of water from a passing tray and stood near the edge of the room, watching. He was very good at watching. Julian Sterling was 28 years old. He was the son of a real estate developer, a man who had made a fortune building condominiums and shopping centers, and had passed on to his son not just his money but his sense of entitlement. Julian had never worked a real job in his life. He had never built anything. He had never struggled. He had simply inherited his father's wealth and his father's arrogance, and he had spent his 20s pretending that he had earned every dollar. He was holding court at a table near the bar, surrounded by his friends, a collection of trust fund heirs and social media influencers, and people whose only talent was spending money. Arthur had been watching him for 20 minutes. Julian had already insulted 3 waiters, mocked a woman's dress, and loudly complained about the quality of the champagne. Then Julian noticed Arthur. "Who is the homeless guy?" Julian said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. His friends turned to look. They laughed. Arthur did not react. He took a sip of his water. Julian walked over. He was holding a glass of red wine, expensive, French, the kind that cost more than most people's rent. He stood in front of Arthur and looked him up and down, his eyes lingering on the old jacket, the scuffed shoes, the cheap watch. "Excuse me," Julian said. "I think you are lost. The shelter is 6 blocks that way." Arthur smiled. "I am exactly where I need to be." Julian's eyes narrowed. "You don't belong here. This is a private event, for people who matter." "Every own matters," Arthur said quietly. "You just haven't realized it yet." Julian laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. "What is this? A lecture? From a guy wearing a jacket older than me?" He raised his glass. He tilted it. The red wine spilled over the rim and splashed onto Arthur's shoes. The old shoes, the scuffed leather, the ones he had worn for 10 years. "Oops," Julian said. "Clumsy me." The table erupted in laughter. Arthur looked down at his shoes. The wine soaked into the leather, dark and red like blood. He looked up at Julian. His face was calm. His eyes were steady. "Enjoy your evening," Arthur said. He turned and walked away. Behind him, Julian called out, "Yeah, that is right. Go back to your cardboard box, old man." Arthur did not look back. He walked out of the ballroom, down the marble staircase, and into the lobby. He pulled out his phone. He typed a message to his lawyer. A man named Frank, who had worked with him for 30 years. Boy it tonight. No limits. Frank's response came within seconds. Understood. Arthur put his phone away. He walked outside and climbed into the back of a waiting car. A black sedan, unremarkable, the kind that blended into traffic. He did not go home. He went to the offices of his holding company, where the real work would be done. The clock on the dashboard read 8:47 p.m. He had 14 hours. Frank met him at the office. Frank was 67 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes, and the kind of face that had seen everything. He had been Arthur's lawyer for 3 decades. He had helped Arthur build his empire from nothing, acquisition by acquisition, deal by deal, brick by brick. He is desperate, Frank said, spreading the documents across the conference table. The current owner has until noon tomorrow to secure financing. If he doesn't, the bank takes everything. Arthur sat down. He picked up the first document, the financial statement, the one that showed the hotel's mounting losses, the unpaid loans, the creditors circling like sharks. How much does he need? 400 million by noon. Arthur nodded. And we have the cash. Frank smiled. It was not a happy smile. We have more than enough. The question is whether we want to use it. I want to use it. Arthur, this is personal. You know that, right? This isn't about the numbers. This is about a boy who spilled wine on your shoes. Arthur looked at Frank. His eyes were calm. Do you know what that boy said to me, Frank? He said I didn't belong. He said I was poor. He looked at me, at the man who built this city, and saw nothing. Frank was silent. I've spent my whole life being invisible, Arthur continued. I've let people underestimate me because it made business easier. But tonight, that boy taught me something. He taught me that invisibility has a cost. It lets people like him treat people like me like garbage. He picked up a pen. Tonight, I am not being invisible anymore. He signed the document. Frank picked it up. He looked at the signature. Arthur's name, written in the same steady hand that had signed 1,000 deals. I'll call the owner, Frank said. We can close by midnight. Do it. Frank walked out of the room. Arthur sat alone at the conference table, looking at the documents, thinking about the boy with the red wine and the cruel laugh. He did not feel angry. He felt something worse. He felt determined. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Frank's voice was tired but triumphant. It is done. The owner signed. The hotel is yours. Every brick, every window, every piece of furniture, the bar, the restaurant, the penthouse suite where Julian Sterling is currently hosting a party. Arthur stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. The lights of Miami glittered below him like scattered diamonds. What about the leaseholders? He asked. Most are month to month. The Sterling family has a long-term lease on the penthouse. It expires in 6 months. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Can we break it? Frank hesitated. Legally. Number, but we can make it very, very uncomfortable for them. We can schedule maintenance. We can cut off certain amenities. We can... No, Arthur said. I don't want games. I want him gone tomorrow morning. Frank was silent for a long moment. Yes, it is still there. Then give him 30 days starting tomorrow. And if he refuses to leave? Arthur smiled. It was a cold smile. Then we call the sheriff. Arthur arrived at the hotel at 7:30 a.m. He was wearing a different jacket today, navy blue, tailored. Expensive but not flashy. His shoes were new, polished leather, no scuffs. His watch was the Patek Philippe, the one he had left in the drawer the night before. He walked through the lobby. The morning shift was just coming on. The manager, a nervous man named Thompson, saw him and went pale. "Mr. Vance," Thompson said, bowing slightly. "We weren't expecting you until noon." Arthur smiled. "I wanted to see the sunrise." He walked past Thompson and toward the elevators. He did not go up. He went to the concierge desk and asked for a cup of coffee. Black. No sugar. Then he sat down in a chair in the lobby. A chair that was now his, and waited. Julian Sterling came down at 8:15 a.m. He was still wearing last night's clothes. His shirt was untucked. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were red from too much champagne and too little sleep. His friends trailed behind him, a parade of hungover privilege, stumbling toward the exit. Julian saw Arthur sitting in the lobby. He stopped, his face twisted into that same ugly smile. "You again," Julian said. "Come to clean the toilets?" Arthur did not stand. He did not speak. He simply looked at Julian with the calm, patient gaze of a man who had all the time in the world. Thompson appeared at Arthur's side. He was holding a leather folder, the documents from last night's acquisition. "Mr. Vance," Thompson said, his voice trembling slightly. "The paperwork is complete. The hotel is officially yours." He handed Arthur the folder. Julian's smile faltered. "What? What did you just call him?" "This is Mr. Vance, the new owner." Julian laughed. It was a desperate sound. "That is impossible. He is a homeless guy. He is wearing a jacket from Goodwill." Arthur stood up. He opened the folder and pulled out the first document. The deed, signed and notarized, with his name in elegant black ink. "Julian," Arthur said quietly. "Last night you spilled wine on my shoes. You called me a beggar. You told me to go back to my cardboard box." Julian's face was pale now. His friends had stopped laughing. "I am not a beggar, Julian. I am the man who just bought this hotel. Every room, every chair, every piece of art on these walls." Arthur stepped closer. "Including the penthouse suite where you've been living for the past 3 years." Julian's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You are lying." "I don't lie," Arthur said. "I just don't talk." He turned to Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, please inform Mr. Sterling that his lease has been terminated. He has 30 days to vacate the premises." Thompson nodded. "Yes, Mr. Vance." Julian grabbed Arthur's arm. "You can't do this, my father." "Your father," Arthur interrupted, "is a small man who built a small company on the backs of people he exploited. He owes my holding company $4 million. I own his debt." Julian let go. He stepped back. His face was the color of ash. You own my father? I own your father's debt, which means I own your father, which means I own you." Arthur smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Last night, you asked me what I was doing here. I'll tell you. I was here to buy the ground beneath your feet." He gestured toward the door. "Now, please, gather your things and leave. You have 30 days. But if I were you, I'd start packing today." Julian Sterling did not last 30 days. He lasted 3. His father's company collapsed within a week. The debts were called in. The loans were foreclosed. The partners pulled out. Julian's friends disappeared. The same ones who had laughed at Arthur's jacket. The same ones who had cheered when Julian spilled the wine. They were nowhere to be found. Julian moved into a studio apartment on the other side of the city. He got a job, a real job, for the first time in his life. He sold his car. He sold his watches. He sold everything. He thought about calling Arthur. He thought about apologizing. He thought about begging for forgiveness. But he knew, deep down, that forgiveness was not something he deserved. And he knew, even deeper, that Arthur Vance was not the kind of man who gave second chances to people who had shown him who they really were. Arthur stood on the balcony of the penthouse suite, the one that had belonged to Julian Sterling just days ago, and looked out at the city. The sun was setting. The sky was orange and gold. The ocean stretched out to the horizon, endless and calm. Frank stood beside him, holding a glass of champagne. "It is done," Frank said. "The Sterlings have vacated. The lease is officially terminated. The hotel is fully yours." Arthur nodded. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. "Do you know what I learned, Frank?" he asked. "What?" "I learned that clothes can be rented, cars can be leased, watches can be borrowed, but character cannot be faked. Julian Sterling had everything, money, status, connections, and he had nothing, because he never learned the one thing that matters." Frank waited. "He never learned to see the person in front of him," Arthur said. "He looked at me and saw an old man in a cheap jacket. He never bothered to look deeper. He never asked who I was. He never asked what I had done. He just assumed that because I looked poor, I was poor." Arthur turned away from the balcony. That was his mistake, and it cost him everything. I am 72 years old now. I have been rich. I have been poor. And I have learned that the most important thing wealth can give you is not a penthouse or a private jet or a collection of expensive watches. The most important thing wealth can give you is the power to say no. No to the people who try to use you. No to the people who try to humiliate you. No to the people who look at you and see nothing. Julian Sterling learned that lesson too late. He learned that the man in the old jacket was not a beggar. He was not a failure. He was not someone to be mocked or dismissed. He was the man who owned the ground beneath his feet. And now Julian Sterling lives in a small apartment on the wrong side of town. He drives a 10-year-old car. He works a job he hates. He has nothing. I still wear my old jacket sometimes. The brown one. The one with the worn elbows. I wear it to remind myself that money does not make the man. Character does. And character, unlike money, cannot be bought. It can only be earned. If you have ever been judged by your clothes, your car, or your bank account, remember Arthur's story. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. The richest person in the room rarely looks like it. And the person you dismiss today might be the person who owns everything tomorrow. So be careful who you spill your wine on. You never know who is watching. You never know who is waiting. And you never know who is about to buy the ground beneath your feet. If you've ever been underestimated, leave the word tick in the comments. The clock is still ticking, and your time, unlike theirs, is not for sale.